Do you think that there is a start button for the apocalypse? Because this is a question that has moved from ancient scripture to the center of modern global attention today. While some of us see the end times as inevitable fate, others actually believe in a concept called hastening. The idea that human action can and will trigger the final hour. From the construction of the Third Temple to the completion of the Great Commission, we are exploring whether humans can wrestle with the divine decree. Can human action really hasten the arrival of Jesus Christ, or the Dajjal, or the emergence of Gog and Magog? Join us today for a deep comparative theological analysis of the three perspectives: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. We will dive into the eschatology of the three faiths to answer one very important question. Can humans really force God's hands and trigger the end times, or not? Shockingly, the Quran and the Bible give us the exact opposite answers. And I will start with the Islamic answer because it's a very simple and clear: absolutely not. The first thing that Allah created was the pen and ordered it to write what was decreed about everything until the Day of Judgment. Afterwards, only afterwards, the universe got created. When the disbelievers asked the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, when will this threat come, the threat that you're talking about? Allah said, when their time arrives, they cannot delay it for a moment, nor they could advance it. In fact, the Quran asks, do the wicked realize what they are really asking him to hasten? Those who disbelieve in it ask to hasten it, but the believers are fearful of it. Surely those who dispute about the hour have gone far astray. Muslims don't challenge Allah's decree, nor question it. Allah cannot be questioned about what He does, but people will definitely be questioned. The signs of the hour will come when they come. The only problem we have is that man was created of haste. Allah said, I will show you my signs, so do not impatiently urge me to hasten them. The only entity who ever challenged Allah's decree in the whole Islamic theology was a jinn by the name of Iblis. When he disagreed with Allah's plan, he earned himself the name Shaitan. But when we switch away from the Islamic theology and dig deep into the teachings of the Bible, we find the exact opposite. Here, striving with the divine is not always interpreted as a rebellion. Sometimes it's actually celebrated as a holy wrestle, as demonstrated here in the story of Jacob, when he said that he saw God face to face. He wrestled with God all night until God finally told him, let me go for its daybreak. Jacob said to God, no, I will not let you go unless you bless me first. During the fight, God saw that he couldn't overpower Jacob. And finally, God told Jacob that from now on you will be called Israel, because you struggled with God. The contrast between the two theologies is mesmerizing. In the Islamic framework, the only entity that challenged the divine decree got the name Shaitan, the accursed, while in the biblical framework, the one who struggled with God and refused to let God go got the name Israel, the one who wrestles with the divine. To really understand this concept of holy wrestle, we have to look at Jacob's history. Long before he wrestled with God face to face, he was already a man known for forcing his own destiny. For example, when his blind father was supposed to pass the ultimate divine blessing to his older brother Esau, Jacob refused to simply accept the established divine decree. Instead of waiting for the divine plan to unfold naturally, he challenged the order of things. Refusing to accept to be second, Jacob and his mother orchestrated a massive deception. Jacob literally covered his hand and his back and his neck with the skin of young goats to mimic his brother's physical touch. Then when he approached his blind father, Isaac felt the animal hair and was completely fooled, thinking that this was Esau, not Jacob. Through this disguise, Jacob forced the divine blessing to go to him instead of his older brother, whom it belonged to from the beginning. He didn't wait for God to hand him his destiny. No, he took matter into his own hands. From these two stories, we understand that it is theologically possible for a human to challenge God's decree according to the Bible. But it's important to mention here that in the Islamic theology, Yaqub or Jacob is a prophet with very high moral standard who would never deceive or rebel against Allah's decree. But from a biblical perspective, the idea of human forcing God's hand is actually on the table. This is why we decided to spend a lot of time researching how this idea affected the Christian doctrine. And we almost couldn't believe what we found. Because it turns out that Christianity from 300 AD to the 1830s is completely different than Christianity in the last 2 centuries. For nearly 1,800 years, stretching from St. Augustine in the 4th century all the way through the Protestant Reformation, the absolute dominant view in Christianity was a doctrine called supersessionism, commonly known today as replacement theology. Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and mainline Protestant believed that because the leaders of Judea rejected the Messiah, God permanently revoked their status as the chosen people, and the church itself became the new Israel. They believed Zion represented the heavenly afterlife, or a global church, not a physical piece of real estate in the Middle East. That is until a man called John Nelson Darby completely shattered the theology that lasted 1800 years and invented a completely new doctrine called Dispensationalism. Then in 1909, C.I. Scofield printed it globally in his reference Bible. Darby argued that Jewish people are still chosen, and God never cancelled his original covenant with Abraham. Scofield was the first to teach that Israel must literally return to the physical land, rebuild the physical temple, and fight a physical war, ignoring the past 1800 years of church teachings, and most importantly, ignoring the teachings of Jesus himself when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, but now my kingdom is from another place." And ignoring Paul when he said that not all who are descendants of Israel are Israel. In other words, it's not the children by physical descent who are God's children. No, but it's the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. Paul was saying bloodline doesn't matter. What matters is righteousness. Because Scofield's notes were printed right next to the sacred biblical text, millions of people over the next century subconsciously elevated Scofield's 19th century commentary to the level of the ancient scripture itself. It became the absolute standard for American evangelicals, selling tens of millions of copies. Combine this newly invented theology of dispensationalism with the idea of forcing God's hand as a holy wrestle from Jacob, and you will understand the motive behind a lot of decisions they make. From their perspective, even if some actions seem illogical or immoral or whatever, it's for a greater good. It will bring Jesus back down to earth and he will rule for 1,000 years. So whatever losses they expect, it's worth it. And this brings us to the final perspective, the Jewish eschatology and the ancient quest for the third temple. In Judaism, the concept of striving with the divine didn't stop in the desert with Jacob. No. Over the centuries, it evolved from physical wrestling with God into theological wrestling. There is a famous story in the Talmud called the Oven of Achnai that perfectly illustrates this point. A group of revered rabbis were locked in a fierce debate over highly specific legal questions. Rabbi Eliezer stood entirely alone in his opinion against the majority of the sages. To prove he was right, Eliezer called down many miracles. Then he called out to heaven itself to ask for help in his debate. Suddenly, a divine voice from God himself echoed through the hall. "Why do you dispute with Rabbi Eliezer? The divine law always agrees with him." The story says that God himself publicly took the side of Eliezer in the debate. In this case, you would expect the other rabbis to fully submit, right? But instead of bowing down in silent submission to the Creator's voice, Rabbi Yeshua stood to his feet, looked up the heavens and quoted the Torah back to God. "Lo b'shamayim hi," it is not in heaven. He declared that since God already gave the law to humans on Mount Sinai, the law was no longer in heaven, and it was now firmly in the hands of humanity to interpret it the way they want. God no longer has a vote. The majority of scholars in the story ruled against the divine voice, and they won. And it gets more interesting. Because how do you think God reacted to this ultimate challenge? Do you think he punished them? No. According to the Talmud, God smiled and declared, "My children have defeated me, my children have defeated me." In this tradition, taking ownership of the divine plan isn't a rebellion, it is the ultimate goal of a mature believer. Which explains why thousands of years later, human beings are still actively trying to force the final chapter of prophecy. The movement today refuses to simply wait, much like Jacob when he wrestled with God for blessing. Groups like the Temple Institute believe that human action is required to hasten the Messiah's arrival. They aren't just praying for the third temple, they have already drawn up the blueprints. There was only one problem holding them back. If they just rebuild the temple today, no priest can ever step in it. If he does, he will immediately die, because there is something called the impurity of death. If you touch one dead body, you become impure. And then if someone touches you, he also becomes impure. And then if someone else touches this someone, he also becomes impure, and so on and so on. And because 2000 years have already passed since the last temple, rabbinic authorities assumed that 100% of humans there are already impure. It is an absolute biological lock. According to the Book of Numbers, the priests cannot enter or rebuild the holy site without achieving the state of highest ritual purity, which can only be achieved by the ashes of the red heifer. And the great 12th century philosopher Maimonides, or Musa ibn Maymun, wrote the famous prophecy saying that the 10th red heifer will be accomplished by the Messiah himself. So instead of waiting for their Messiah to bring the red heifer and purify them, they decided to force the prophecy to happen. The requirement for this animal is so impossibly strict. Not even 2 hairs of another color are allowed. The whole history records only 9 heifers like that were sacrificed in ancient times. But thanks to modern science and, of course, the millions of dollars spent, they were able to breed the red heifers in Texas and move them to Israel. By fulfilling this impossible mitzvah, they are attempting to insert the final key into the ignition of the prophecy. But did you notice the problem with the heifer ritual? I think most of you already did. It was supposed to be done by the Messiah himself, which is a pure person. And everyone else in the state are already impure since 2000 years already passed. So, who will do the ritual? This is why rabbis found a solution. The Mishnah describes a mind-bending protocol. Special courtyards were built in Jerusalem directly on solid bedrock, with hollow spaces carved beneath them to block any hidden impurity from rising out of the earth. Pregnant women were brought into this fortress-like compounds to give birth, and their children were raised in absolute pristine isolation. They never touched anything in the outside world. When it was time to finally mix the ashes of the red heifer with pure spring water, those isolated children were the only human beings on earth pure enough to actually do it. But they couldn't just walk to the water spring. To get them there, the priests had to place wooden doors on the backs of oxen and had the children sit on top of them, ensuring that their feet never had to touch the ground. And the surprise is, this is still happening till today. The Temple Institute recruits boys from specific families of Kohanim, the biblical priestly lineage of Aaron. To ensure that these boys remain ritually pure from the moment they are born, their families have to follow incredibly strict modern precautions. First of all, no hospital birth. Children must be born in specialized environments. Throughout their lives, they are strictly forbidden to ever visit a cemetery or attend a funeral, even fly over a graveyard or enter any hospital for any reason. And almost everyone knows now that this specific ritual is scheduled to be performed very, very soon. And the only things that will be left in their plan to force the end-time prophecy to happen is the fight with Gog and Magog, who are believed to be a group of nations who will attack Israel to trigger the divine intervention that will protect them. In the book of Ezekiel, Gog is described as the king of Rosh. You might heard some people comparing the word Rosh here to Russia, or the word Meshech here to Moscow, while knowing that Persia is Iran today, Togarma is modern-day Turkey, and Fut is modern-day Libya. They interpret these ancient names to refer to modern nations that we know today, and they claim that these nations will fulfill the Ezekiel prophecy. But instead of waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled, they are actively pushing its fulfillment. But is it really a prophecy if we are purposely forcing it to happen? Can humans really force the end times to come? Will God's plans be affected by whatever some of us are doing in this worldly life? For evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews, the theology of Jacob remains alive. The end times is a holy wrestle, a timeline that can be actively hastened through missionary work or the ultimate preparation of the red heifer and the temple. But for Muslims, the theology of Al-Lawh Al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, stands unshakable. The ink already dried before the earth was even formed. You cannot hasten what is decreed, and you cannot delay what is destined. Our ultimate test of faith isn't how hard we force the timeline. It's how perfectly you can submit to the will of God. 3 perspectives, 1 final hour. And the only question left is, whose timeline are we really on? And who are we really waiting for? The Muslim Jesus who will break the cross, or the evangelical Jesus who will rule the earth for 1,000 years, or the Jewish Messiah who will claim the throne of David? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to know why does Allah sometimes allow suffering and allow natural disasters, we talked about it in this video. And remember that you can help our da'wah simply by helping this video spread. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.